as we dig into this whole idea of selling on purpose, having an on purpose conversation, and we think about the idea of defining reality, where we're focusing in on is this one of the cornerstones of this conversation is if we don't want to be treated like every other person out there who's selling life insurance, one of the things that we have to do is we can't sound like everyone else out there who's selling life insurance. Now, that may sound obvious, but if we take a look around, really, what do we see? Well, we see everyone else out there who's trying to be the best at what everyone else is doing. And what everyone else out there is doing is talking about features and benefits. They're not going back to that basic idea of defining reality, asking the hard questions, breaking down those walls of resistance to talk about what's really going on. Now, as you start to do that, here's a couple of facts that we're going to have to get comfortable with. You and I, we don't control outcomes. There's nothing that you and I can do or say that will control whether or not someone takes an appointment with us or whether or not someone decides to buy from us. Instead, what you and I can control is the process. Now, this is the moves that we make, the things that we say. We're going to get into that in just a couple of minutes, but just like I said before, I want to step back so we're all on the same page. Some people, they're very good at what they do, but without a conscious understanding of why. I call that talent versus skill. Talent will eventually fail you. Skill is something that we build up over time. The things that you hear me say, they're not magic words, but they are on purpose. Now, as we go through this entire program, nothing that you hear me say is going to be by accident. That's a skill. Skill is brought to the table on purpose. It may sound like I'm repeating myself there, but really those are two different ideas. Skill is brought to the table on purpose, meaning that it's acquired over time. It's about this idea of recognizing specific points along the path from open to close. Now, a lot of people, when we get a chance to talk one-on-one, they want to know, how do I do this? How do you bring in such high-dollar clients? They almost think that I've got some magic bullet, and the fact is that I don't. But I've spent a lot of time perfecting my craft. A lot of people are looking for magic words. What do you say to close this person? And whenever I hear that, I always get a little worried because they're looking for the secret sauce, and there isn't any. Now, before you say, wait a minute, I'm all done, stick with me. Now, before we talk about that, a lot of people will get involved in a program just like this because they want to hear yes more often. They want to close more policies faster. Now, they're surprised when they find out that we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how do we get to no as fast as possible. And there's a thought that I want to share with you. It's not in these slides, but it goes like this. When resistance goes down, motivation becomes unnecessary. When resistance goes down, to us asking hard questions, to us asking real questions to figure out what's actually happening, when that resistance goes down, motivation, it's not needed. We don't have to pump ourselves up. As we go through this, it's important that we get on the same page of this idea of process versus outcome. There's a difference between, just like between talent and skill, between playing to win and playing not to lose. Playing to win says, I want to get a decision. Yes or no, either one is fine, but please give me a decision. Playing not to lose is kind of dancing around those types of questions that we say, I can't ask that, or I don't want to present that, what it is that we're talking about right now in a way that makes them feel like I want them to buy what it is that I'm selling. Now, that's just crazy. We do want them to buy what we're selling. But before we get to that step, let's figure out, why do they even want it? I'll let you in on a little secret. The best salesperson that you know has taken 10 times more rejection in a single day than almost everybody else. And here's why. It's because they're engaged in conversations about what it is that we have to offer. They're willing to bring those conversations to a head to figure out, should we even keep talking? If the monthly amount that we're discussing, if that's not even in your realm of possibility, and by the way, when do we want to know that? As soon as possible, right? Well, defining reality, asking those hard questions means that we're going to hear no a lot. On the other side of that, though, the faster we can get to that idea of no, the more time that we can spend talking with people who either have the motivation, the desire, and the authority to say yes. If all those things are true, and this seems basic, then why don't we do that? Well, most of us are playing not to lose. We don't want to scare them away. We don't want to rock the boat. Getting out of our own way, it starts with getting out of our own head. Giving yourself permission to find out, after we do this, what happens next. See, there's a difference between a professional and a natural. The professional has a very clear understanding of the structure behind what they do. The natural salesperson, they're feeding off of talent. Now, if you're one of those who's lucky enough to have gotten to a certain level in your business based on pure talent, congratulations, hats off to you. But to everyone else that doesn't have all the magic words come spilling out of their mouths, we have to do it on purpose. Now, ultimately, at the end of the day, skill always outperforms talent. Let me hit that one more time. The professional has a very clear understanding of the structure behind what they do. Now, a lot of times people ask me, how do you close this person? Do you have any magic lines? Now, I mentioned that always gets me a little concerned when I hear that, because they're looking for tips. It's what I call tips and tricks. And the fact is that you already know what to say. Here, I'll prove it to you. Have you ever had a time when you hung up the phone, or when you walked out of a meeting and you said to yourself, oh man, I should have said that? Yeah, of course, we all have. And while we've touched on this before, let's dig into that. Even after the event, if we knew what to say, the problem was really couldn't recognize the space and the time where we should have said it. Now, a lot of us, we take on all this responsibility of determining how things are going to go. I call that being outcome dependent. Outcome dependent says, get an appointment, make a sale, and we'll let those results define who we are. If we sell X number of dollars in a week, if we hit X number of policies in a month, and we pound our chest and we take a deep breath and we say, I'm really good. But if we have a down month, if we have a bad month, we're also taking on all that responsibility for that. Let's talk about it in terms of effort. Let me ask you this. Is it entirely possible for someone to put in the exact same amount of effort and time, and one person to have a fantastic month and the other person to have a horrible month? Of course it is. The quality of the effort wasn't any different. How many hours they worked wasn't any different, and how long they worked each day, how many conversations they have. It's entirely possible for both of these things to have completely different outcomes. When we start to allow the outcome to say something about our skills, our level of commitment, sometimes even our product, we're taking on way too much responsibility. What we're aware of, we can control. What we're unaware of controls us. And here's a silly example. Going back to those two individuals, they both put in the exact same effort, time, and energy. One individual at the end of the month feels really good. The other individual is starting to question if they've even got what it takes. But what we're aware of, we can control. What we're unaware of controls us. Are we putting in the time, the effort, and the energy? Instead of being outcome dependent, let's focus on the process. Forget about that last step and let's concentrate on the next step. Here's what happens. Frustration, it starts to creep in when we place way too much meaning on our interaction with the person that we're speaking with. If we talk to someone who's rude, or if we start an initial conversation with with somebody who has huge defensive walls up, and we got off on that conversation and it didn't go well, we take all that responsibility for that conversation. We might be thinking that we did something wrong when in fact the conversation may have gone badly and it had absolutely nothing to do with us. Frankly, if you look around the office, a common thread of people who are struggling is that they can see the final step, make the sale, get the appointment, clearer than they can see the very next step. Process over outcome. Ultimately, what happens is our conditioning starts to make choices for us. Now, that sounds cool, but what does it really mean? Our conditioning makes choices for us. Let me ask you this. Have you ever picked up the phone with the intention of speaking with somebody, and as the phone's ringing, you start hoping to get voicemail? Or how about this? Have you ever had somebody that you've been meaning to follow up with? It's a really big deal, but you find yourself putting it off? Yeah, we all have. Now, sometimes, believe it or not, and it sounds crazy when we say this out loud, but sometimes we don't want to follow up with somebody because we don't want to lose the idea of the opportunity that we have. Now, this is a really big deal, and I got to get it just right, and it's got to close. That's outcome dependent. Now, let me ask you this one. Have you ever set a goal that you didn't achieve? And we can talk about business or personal life. It doesn't matter, but I think we all have. One of the interesting things is that people that are outcome dependent, if I make a sale, if I get an appointment, then I did a good job. If I don't make a sale, if I don't get an appointment, then I did a bad job. One of the things that people who are outcome dependent don't realize is that it's not because they're not smart enough. They're not hitting their goals because they're not trying hard enough, or they're failing because they don't want it bad enough. In fact, most people that I speak with, they've got all three of those things, but when they're outcome dependent, we can't see what's right in front of us. Here's what it is. It's usually the strategy that we're using is setting us up to fail. Now, let's stop right there. What strategy are you using to open phone calls with potential clients? What strategies are you using on purpose to ask them the types of questions that makes it easy for them to open up and have a genuine conversation with you? What kinds of questions are you asking that helps them to relate to a scenario that someone else is having? When I ask people, what is your sales strategy? Let me back up. When I ask people, what is it that you want? What would a perfect sales call look like? What's interesting is that I almost immediately start getting some kind of list of, here's what I don't want to have happen. Now, knowing what you don't want, it tells you what things to avoid. And oddly enough, people don't even ever stop to look at that. Knowing what you don't want only tells you what things to avoid. And if you can become totally brutally honest with yourself about what you're not doing, that's when things start to change. Here's what outcome dependent looks like. It's being very concerned about how this interaction makes me feel. It's worrying about, how do I appear to other people? How am I measuring up to everyone else in the company? That's outcome dependent. As soon as we're outcome dependent, we can't define reality with somebody, because the idea of rocking the boat or losing that person or scaring them away is more painful than getting to yes or no. Yes is completely our favorite answer, but let me toss this out. If you can't get a yes, get a no. Now, a lot of times, if you step back and you look at how do you normally go about making a sale, what most people find is that usually we get caught up in just one way to create an outcome. Let me give you another example. A lot of people say that they don't like scripts and scripts aren't for them. And I'm not advocating that you have to use a script, but they dislike scripts for the wrong reasons. They dislike scripts because it feels like someone else's words. It feels canned. I get that. But the real reason that they should dislike a very rigid way to sell is because that's only one way to create an outcome. One of my favorite quotes is, "There's nothing more powerful than an idea, unless it's the only idea you have. Then there's nothing more destructive." Now, believe it or not, if If we were to follow you around with a video camera and watch how you engage with every single prospect, here's what we'd probably find, is that unconsciously you kind of drop into the exact same pattern with every single person. The people that are really struggling to make things happen on purpose, to start having an on-purpose conversation, they've never taken a look at the system that they're using, but they can be very aware of the fact that they don't want to scare the person away. Instead of going outcome dependent, let's talk about some ideas of becoming independent of the outcome. Now, our job initially is to create the circumstance for whatever that is. It's to create the circumstance to have a conversation. Create the circumstance to figure out, is what we have something that you would even be interested in knowing more about? Now, we got to be very careful about making decisions for other people that we don't know. That's not a technique. It's a mindset. Have you ever put together options for somebody that the monthly amount was way different than what they were going to be expecting? Or how about this? Have you ever had a conversation with someone where what they were now going to be required to do was totally different than what you know they were expecting to be able to have to do? That's making a decision for somebody that we don't know. Independent of the outcome says this: it's our job to ask, it's their job to decide. Our job is simply to talk about what it is that we offer. And we do that in such a way that makes it very simple for someone to tell us whether or not this is even a conversation that they want to have. As soon as we get there, our job then becomes to find out why. Opening up different options, looking at things in a different way. One of the definitions that I have for a professional salesperson, all the top performers that I've ever seen all have this trait. It's their willingness to look at an idea maybe in a different way, and their ability to take action. Once we start looking at some of these established thoughts that say, I might be following the exact same system every single time I'm speaking with somebody and not being aware of it, taking a look at, in my heart of hearts, what is it that I'm really not doing, and then making a decision either way. I'm not talking about good or bad, but making a decision as to whether or not we want to do it. No one says that if you don't ask those hard questions, you're never going to make a sale. That's not true. But when we can start operating out of choice, what we're aware of, we control. What we're unaware of controls us. When we can start operating out of choice rather than out of habit, all of a sudden the world opens up to us and we can stop taking all the responsibility on our shoulders. A lot of people, they hear that idea of it's our job to ask and it's their job to decide. A lot of people are trying to do both parts. They're asking the question and then they want to help them decide. It doesn't work that way, does it? If we want to get very specific results, we have to first get good at recognizing what results are we currently getting. When I do this, what typically happens? When we follow a process, that the moves that we make, the things that we say, we can let go of that outcome. That outcome being make a sale or get an appointment. Those are decisions that someone else has to make. We can certainly stack the deck in our favor, making sure that we're saying all the right things and making sure we're presenting ideas in a way that makes it easy to understand. When we focus on process and not outcome, it means we're literally learning to get comfortable with every single step. Now, as we put each of these pieces together, the purpose of that initial conversation is to figure out, is what we have worth looking into? We're going to get there eventually. If we can define reality, if we can stop saying, I got this outcome and here's what it means to me, and we can simply focus on the process, we can start spending our time and our efforts and our energies on things that we can control. When you follow a process, when you use a system, you never have to worry about what to do next. Anxiety, it literally ignites procrastination. Think about your pipeline right now. Is there anything that you're putting off? Is there anything that you're procrastinating on? I promise you that the reason you're procrastinating on that specific task is because you're trying to control the outcome. As we go through the rest of this session here, here's what I'd like you to be open to. As we spend more time talking about this process and you want to start maybe having some of this stuff show up in your business faster, think about it this way. View the process like an experiment. Here's the easiest way to let go of the outcome. View the process like an experiment. And here's what happens. It's going to change the way you look at things. You can judge the results, and those results don't necessarily have to define you. The result is the result is the result. And as soon as we stop taking on all of that responsibility of trying to guarantee or force the situation as to what happens next, we break down all of those walls of defense, and getting to that one good client becomes a heck of a lot easier.